Okay, I'm going to try this again. I can't believe I used to talk for a living. So two things I wanted to preface is one, if something happens to me, I just want everybody to know that I do not have idolization of self-harm. So if I end up in a water tank, then ask Michael Aaron Waddell. He's at a restaurant called Radio Bean in Vermont, and ask Joan Shannon, who's the city councilor in Vermont. And I saw her Facebook, she just met President Biden. So she has ties to the White House. So that's who did it. If something happens to me. Now, somebody came on my live stream last Friday, and I only have 141 subscribers, and I've only been doing YouTube for 8 weeks. I used to be a teacher, but now I'm disabled, but my background's in history. So that's what I did before I was a conspiracy theorist and a truther. So someone came on my live stream, and he had kind of a foreign sounding name. Maybe he was Latin. And he wanted to warn me, which is how they do it. He wanted to warn me about her. And so maybe I can take that either two ways. He warned me about her, and so I kind of got an idea who he was referring to. And then strangely enough, I'm talking about Elisa Lam in the elevator game, because Ghost Adventures had a completely different take on this story. And Ghost Adventures said that she was playing the South Korean elevator game ritual that allows you to contact the dead. And if you're in a hotel and it has like more than 10 floors, you can press a certain number of buttons, and this woman, this ghostly figure, comes onto the elevator, but you're not allowed to acknowledge her or speak to her, and you only have a certain amount of time before you can get back, or you die and you're, I guess, trapped in limbo. So Ghost Adventures had a completely different take on this. And so while I was telling this, and then after I got that cryptic, ominous message from a chatter, my only one chatter, at that point, my bathroom door, which is 3 feet to the left, it started opening, but very slowly, like creaky, like a haunted house. I thought, well, that's strange. So there was that. And so this video is about Morbid, who's AKA Pablo Vergara. I don't know him personally. I'm conflicted whether or not I should try to reach out to him and ask him, because either A, he's going to lie to me and tell me what I already kind of know what his official stance is. So I guess I could talk to him, but I don't want to harass him. I don't want to give the impression that I'm harassing him by asking him a question. Officially, he's going to say that he was a victim of Reddit users and internet sleuthers, and that he's the victim. And if you ask him about this situation, he's going to accuse you of harassment. So it's pretty much set up as a catch-22 that you can't ask. So but we'll get into that, because I want to know if he was a victim of Satanic Panic. And the new Satanic Panic movement, I'll talk about Satanic Panic, and I'll talk about whether or not he was a decoy or a patsy, or he was framed by someone to look like he had done something and committed some type of harm to Elisa Lam. Because personally, I don't think he ever met Elisa Lam, and I don't think he ever harmed her in any way. But I think he's somehow connected to this and is a much bigger part of the story than what we were told on the Netflix docuseries. So I think he's innocent. He never He never met her. He never touched her. He didn't harm her. That's my opinion. But I think there's more to his story than what was told in the Netflix doc series. So that's what I wanted to look at. I also think maybe some of the people, like Morbid, like Amy Price, like Katie Orphan, I think some of these people are crisis actors. I would not put it past that these are crisis actors. And that these were, maybe that's the correct term. So I was thinking maybe that's true. Because what I'm looking at is Hollywood's guilty of this, because ever since Hollywood's inception, it's always worked for the government. It's always been propaganda. And Netflix is, anything Netflix is doing is suspect. If Netflix tells you anything, then the opposite, the inversion of it is probably true. I don't trust Netflix, and I don't trust Hollywood. I also don't trust the government or the media. So if you study history, like I've studied history, been studying history at a collegiate level since 1996. So I have a BA and an MA in history. And if you know history, you know not to trust the government. It's not like they have good track records. So, and that's what I'm going to be covering. First, I'm going to give you a recap, because I did a 90-minute introduction. There was a lot of background information, so I'm going to do a quick recap. And then I'm going to talk about Morbid, and then I'll come back and do a third part that's more about Amy Price. So last video, I talked about how there were actually multiple Cecil hotels. That the Cecil Hotel in LA was owned by the Cecil family. It is based on the original hotel in London. And the Cecil family, they have ties. They have ties going back to 1600 to Queen Elizabeth I, not the second, that's our current Queen Mum, but Queen Elizabeth I. Their aristocracy, they were nobility, and they had this large, luxurious palace in London. It was the biggest hotel. It became a hotel eventually. But it was the biggest hotel in Europe. It was very grand, and it had a Masonic lodge. And Aleister Crowley, who, if you don't know who Aleister Crowley is, he was a precursor to Anton LaVey and L. Ron Hubbard of Scientology. He's the first one that started all of that, taking all of the information from the ancient Egyptians and the Knights Templar and the Golden Order, the Dawn and Theosophical Gnosticism, and he combined all of that into what would become the Church of Satan, Wiccanism, all of that. Yeah, I think Druids, he combined all of, yeah. And then later you see how all of his teachings, all of Crowley's teachings, do what thy will, and how that led to other things like Church of Satan, the Anton LaVey, and L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology and Wiccanism. And that all dates back to Crowley. And Crowley pulled from all these other different sources, like Druids and Egyptians and Gnosticism and the Melanins and Order of the Golden Dawn. So he was a frequent guest there, and while he was there, he conjured up a spirit called Lam, and which is a very common name in China. And Lam said he said that Lam spirit that he conjured Lam was like the little gray alien beings, because I don't believe in aliens. I believe in interdimensional demons, these off-world aliens. But I see them as more demons, and of course there's also celestial beings and angels. So that was the original one in London. Now the one in Alexandria, Egypt, which is the very famous where the Library of Alexandria, supposedly the Vatican stole all of the sacred text and knowledge from the library, and then they burnt it down, covering their tracks. And a lot of that ended up in the basement, the tunnels, the warehouses underneath the Vatican. There was also, and so that museum, that hotel feels sort of parched. Dry throat for some reason. I'll power through. Okay, so in Alexandria is where they had a very famous library, and a lot of the information was stolen before it was burnt down. That's one conspiracy theory. And a lot of the information ended up in the Vatican, which is a separate sovereign nation, separate inside of the city of Rome. There was a Hotel Cecil Steinberg there, and it's also near the Cleopatra's Needle, which is actually the obelisk. Then there's the Hotel Cecil in Harlem, dates back to the Harlem Renaissance, and Minton's Playhouse of Jazz Club, and the Cecil Amherst Vanderbilt family estate. So the Amherst and the Vanderbilts are in the Cecil family. They own the Biltmore estate in North Carolina, and it has the very famous drained pool that was featured both in American Horror Story and in some scary art that's owned by the Podesta brothers. So the Cecil family came over here and they married into the Amherst and the Vanderbilts. And the Vanderbilts are very famous for their railroad and steamboat wealth. And of course, that ties into both Carter and Anderson Cooper. So this is ties to the Crowleys and Queen Elizabeth and the Freemasons. So the hotel, and then there's two other ones in India. There's one in India and there's one in Queensland, Australia. And then the Biltmore, Bowman, those are 20 other hotels. So there are there's other Cecil hotels that are somehow related or affiliated with the original Cecil Hotel in London and the Cecil family. So we talked about the elevator game, and I talked about a little bit about female hysteria, because one of the things I did not like about the Netflix docuseries is how they blamed this young woman for living with a mental health diagnosis, and they shamed her for having a mental health or mental illness, and they shamed her for taking medication. Since ancient Egypt and ancient Greece, women were always accused of female hysteria. Normal bodily functions and normal sexuality that would be considered normal today was misdiagnosed as female hysteria, or that the women were crazy. It is where the wandering womb and hysterectomies and some very strange treatments, and sometimes they would give you a hysterectomy for being promiscuous or for causing trouble, or they would institutionalize you. So I just felt like to say that, oh, she drowned or she took her own life because she has bipolar or because she's taking a medication, I didn't believe that. And I really didn't agree with that because, I mean, I'm not bipolar. I have depression, and I take the same medication that she takes. I take Effexor or Venaflex. I take that same medicine. And never has it ever occurred to me to check into a hotel, climb to the roof, climb out a window, climb up a fire escape, up to the rooftop, and then get a ladder, pull out a 20-pound hatch that has a suction lid and no hinge, take all my clothes off, throw it into the water tank, and then throw myself in and drown face up. I don't believe that. I'm not buying it. I don't care if she did have a mental illness, and if she did take an antidepressant, and if she did take other medications that were in her system, there was no drugs or anything else in her system. I don't believe it. When women attempt to take their own lives, they do it through medication, or she may. I'm like, I would like if she had taken her own life using medication, I would believe it. Or if she jumped off the roof. But to drown herself in a water tank, and they had to cut a hole in the tank to pull her out because it was just so far-fetched. I mean, women, and I remember learning this in psychology and sociology, women attempt, especially young women, they attempt taking their own life more than men, but they use passive means such as poison or meds instead of violent, aggressive means, which is why men take their life more and are more successful because they use a much more violent means. I don't think in the history of the world have I ever heard of anyone taking their own life by drowning themselves in a water tank. It happened in a movie, and it happened, I guess, well, it didn't even happen in the movie. So I don't believe it. I think foul play. I don't believe the docuseries, and I don't believe it. And I don't agree with labeling, blaming her for this act because it's only been recently, since 1952, did the American Psychiatric Association drop the female hysteria diagnosis from the DSM. So I just do not like the victim shaming or blaming. I don't think it was a mental health issue. I don't believe that at all. Now, the other thing I talked about, and I'm going to talk about it again and expand on it, is the director's purpose for making this documentary. And that's kind of says it all. His primary purpose was, one, to discredit internet sleuthers, and two, to claim that Morbid is a victim of satanic panic. And that's what we're going to talk about. So the English poet John Milton, he wrote a poem called Paradise Lost. And it's not just about Adam and Eve, it's about all of humanity fall from grace and being expelled into the Garden of Eden. And so that became the title that Berlinger used for his 3-part trilogy, Paradise Lost, The Child Murders of Robin Hood Hills. So he did a 3-part about 3 high school boys who were convicted and eventually, I guess, found innocent or not guilty. As I remember, 3 school-age boys were accused of ritualistically murdering 3 younger boys as part of a blood sacrifice, and it was in West Memphis, Arkansas. And so the argument was that even though it was in the early 90s, this was still part of Satanic Panic. And he did 3 parts. The second part is Revelations, Paradise Lost, Revelations, and Paradise Lost, Purgatory. In 2013, the same year that Elisa Lam went missing, Reese Witherspoon also did. There was also a Hollywood movie called The Devil's Knot. And so similar to Charlie Manson in the Beach Boys and Neil Young, one of the 3 teenage boys that were accused that he was later released from prison, Damien Echols, he, you can find him, he's hanging out with Johnny Depp, and he's doing music and spoken word with the Misfits and Eddie Vedder and Pearl Jam. So that there's this connection between Satanist and Hollywood. Now, Berlinger has made a number of other documentaries for Netflix. 2 of them were about Ted Bundy. So I think one is the serial killer tapes, and then the other is the Hollywood version, fictionalized version of it, with Zac Efron starring as Ted Bundy. And he made one about Jeffrey Epstein. And I've been talking about Jeffrey Epstein for probably 5 years, or 6. And I tried to watch that documentary, but it really didn't explain to you that the whole point of Epstein's Island was because he was a Mossad agent, Israeli intelligence agents, him and Ghislaine Maxwell, and that they were taping everybody because it was a honeypot, just like I guess I was thinking maybe the Playboy Mansion's like that too, that a lot of people went to these honeypots and they did things and they're compromised and they're on camera and they're being blackmailed. And I try to watch the Jeffrey Epstein, his documentary about it, but it just seemed like they only talked about how these 2 people are pedophiles, and then it told you the stories, the little girls, teenage girls' stories, where it seemed a bit exploitive, and I didn't like it. So I don't think he was going to tell the truth about the whole operation. So my theory is that Berlinger made this 4-part docuseries to discredit internet sleuthers, because, I question everything. I think you have to investigate everything. I do not passively accept anything that the media tells me, anything that the LAPD told me about this case, anything that Amy Price and anyone from that corporation has to tell me about it, as far as their version of the events. And I feel like the docuseries went out of its way to negatively criticize any critical thinkers. And it also made a point to, it's an attack on the First Amendment, because the internet is like this wild, wild west, or at least it used to be. And so for people to pull resources together, like what we were doing with Jeffrey Epstein for years, and kept pushing that and pushing about these demonic pedophiles, they really want to discredit that movement. And as far as they have their fact checkers and people are deplatformed, and I'm sure this channel gets affected and people start watching, then I will lose this channel. So as far as being censored and fact checked on social media. But it's a criticism of internet sleuthers, truthers, conspiracy theorists, which is a CIA term. CIA coined that term because that referred to anybody who questioned the Warren report that Oswald acted alone in the JFK assassination. The CIA created the term conspiracy theory. In the 1980s, they created the term Satanic Panic. And Reddit user. So I was watching this docuseries, And I'm doing a free trial on Hulu because I don't have cable, but I'm doing Hulu. And I guess I'll pay for the month for HBO. And HBO is doing a 6-part series called Into the Storm. And please don't leave any comments about these. Oh my gosh. Let me talk about that. Okay, so I used to have a group that researched things like this about demonic pedophiles. And used to be on Twitter, but we're not on Twitter, obviously. But then they started telling me about this calm before the storm and about 4chan. And I would believe that maybe once or twice somebody with government clearance leaked information that's something about something that's going on. But they continue to follow these, and I'm not even going to say it because I don't want to be affiliated with them and I don't want to get in trouble for even criticizing them, because if you talk about it, you'll probably get in trouble. So I'm not going to talk about it. But there's like the 17th letter of the alphabet plus anonymous. So I remember when people started following that, and I kept telling them not to because it was a disinformation program. But no, they're telling me, JFK Jr. was back from the dead, like his ghost or zombie or whatever. Like he's back from the dead, and he's telling them secrets on anonymously on 4chan and then 8chan, and then they're going to go meet up with these people somewhere. And I kept telling them, no, it's a trap. You're being set up. And I kept telling them, you're going to be listed as a domestic terrorist. You're going to be a useful idiot, which is what I guess Karl Marx or Lenin or Stalin said, they need these useful idiots showing up. So I told them not to do it. And I think like out of 30 or 40 people that I used to know who was researching demonic pedophiles and government cover-up, well, they all started doing that garbage. And I don't know. But then you saw what happened. So I was right. I feel vindicated. But yeah, I told them that it was they were being fed some truthful pieces of information, but they really didn't have the discernment to figure out. They didn't really know enough to figure it out. But yeah, that was, and then and it was all done to discredit internet truthers, to show you when you get it wrong. So I want nothing to do with that. I had nothing to do with it from day one. I never believed it. It sounded like a hoax and disinformation campaign. And then I kept telling them, this is what's going to happen. And what happened, that's what happened. So there's that going on HBO. And then Netflix is making this docuseries. So it's all about cracking down on the First Amendment and making things difficult for me, or making things difficult for other truthers or internet sleuthers or Reddit users. So that was the whole point of it. And also to show the new Satanic Panic. Right now, things are pretty well divided and people don't talk to each other. And we're in these echo chambers and it's all very tribalism, that people are divided. And, because they control us by dividing us. So divide and conquer. And if that strategy doesn't work, then they're going to discredit people getting together and pulling their resources and talking and solving something like this. So, and that's what I took away from looking at the docuseries. And I wanted to talk a little bit about Morbid. Okay, so what I heard and what it appeared in the documentary on Netflix, and maybe it wasn't explicitly clear, is that after Elisa Lam was reported missing, within those few days, he began releasing videos, and the videos were about how he's staying at the Cecil Hotel, even though he stayed there around that. He stayed there between February 12th, February 12th for 3 days, and that was 1 year prior. And that's what's stamped on his passport. I believe he lives in Mexico City. And so he released that video, and then he had video where he was chasing a woman down, and supposedly I think the woman dies by drown because he drowns. Yeah, she's drowned, and then he makes a reference to China or Chinese, and Elisa Lam is Chinese. And so it looks like these little digital breadcrumbs that's leading back to him, except the joke is he wasn't there. He was there 1 year prior, and it was all set up. So I guess he got you on that one. Because then, not Reddit, supposedly it wasn't Reddit, it was the Chinese media, and maybe there's something lost in the translation, but the Chinese media, Chinese government, they came after Morbid, and then Morbid, trolling them, did he used a voice modulator thing, and he made this creepy video. It was very ominous and eerie and scary. And in the background, you see pictures of Ted Bundy, another serial killer, and you see pictures of Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia, who stayed at the Cecil Hotel. And that was the last place that she was seen alive. And then 3 days later, she was found dead. So, yeah, and then he made the video with blood on his face, responding to their accusations. And he's like, I'm this big bad Satanist, and I make devil music, but then he's like, I don't know why people think I would harm anyone. Just gonna make videos harming people. But he played into that, and maybe it backfired. I really don't know, and I have to take his word for it. So you can't ask him. I was curious as to why he was meeting in LA. Supposedly he was there working on his music. I don't think he was performing anywhere. I think he was working on music. I'm just curious if anyone told him to put out this information, or if it was somehow, maybe he was like set up and framed to look like he did this, like a decoy, kind of like when you go duck hunting, you put out this fake, or he's made to look like a patsy. And of course, I was thinking about Oswald, because that was supposed to be a false flag. Like, Lee Harvey Oswald was supposed to take those 3 shots and miss, and he was supposed to be arrested, and then he was going to say that he was a communist because he was going around, because Lee Harvey Oswald, if you watch the movie JFK or you read the book by Jim Marrs, Lee Harvey Oswald went, different places, and he kept talking about being very overtly communist. Like, he was being very overtly communist and pro-Castro. And then he was supposed to take those 3 shots, miss, and then be arrested and say, well, communism and Castro made me do it. And then that would justify why we were supposed to invade Cuba again after the Bay of Pigs fiasco. But they set him up. So that's not what happened. But he was a decoy and a patsy. And so I'm wondering, because here's somebody who's going around here's someone who's overtly being a Satanist and into death metal. And I'm not really worried about him because he's low level. The person we need to worry about is a person it's covert, or that a person that has that operates in the shadows and doesn't have a large digital footprint. So I'm just really curious to what extent, because I don't think he heard her or met her, but I think there's a lot more, and that they brought him on there, and they made him a much more integral part of the story, and gave him way too much credit and way too much of a platform. And of course, he wants his 15 minutes of fame. Now, he says he wants privacy, but if you wanted privacy, you wouldn't be on an international platform, because that TV show reaches people internationally. You're doing press. You're putting out information. You currently have 357,000 users for your music, for your YouTube channel, for your music. So he used the word triggered, and like independent online journalists, like conservatives, he says he was deplatformed, that he lost his freedom of expression, and that he contemplated taking his own life, and this affected him and ended up in a psychiatric hospital. But I really don't know to what extent, because you can't argue with that. Like, you can't contact that person, you can't argue with it, you just have to accept it. And so in my honest opinion, I don't think he's innocent. I think he's guilty of something. I don't think he's guilty of harming Elisa Lam. I think he's an amateur. I think a real Satanist is hiding in plain sight. And he's much more powerful, or they exist in the shadows. And so, and then Satanic Panic was a CIA term, and it was because starting in 1980, and it was like the McMartin Preschool case. So this was before the internet, because the government had the internet, and maybe professors, but before the internet, 1980, under the Bush-Reagan administration, and the pedophile sex rings coming out of Omaha, Franklin, SNL cover-up in Boys Town, and I talked about that all, the child pedophile sex rings. I talked about that the last part one. So it was during this time period that children were coming home from daycares, and they had abuse. There was evidence of abuse, you know what I mean, and they were telling these stories. And all the stories throughout the United States were matching up, that they were seeing rituals, they were attending black masses, there was costumes, there was animal sacrifice, there was appropriate activity. So they all had the same story, even though like they all, yeah. So independently of each other, they were all coming, telling their parents and telling people these stories. Now, Colonel Michael Aquino, that I talked about last episode, part one, you know, he was involved in the McMartin case. He was involved in the Franklin cover-up. He was abusing children on the military base, but he was also the founder of the NSA, which is bigger than the CIA. And so he was, I guess he was too big to jail, because the Attorney General at the time, Rudolph Giuliani, chose not to, even though he was completely out of control abusing kids. So Satanic Panic was a CIA term designed to discredit these children. And we saw in the McMartin case and how the social workers, I think they intentionally bungled how they handled it with the dolls. And now because it became a legal precedent that children are not valid witnesses, and they can't tell you what people have done to them and what happened to their own body. And so nobody believes a child because of the McMartin Preschool case. And of course, Hollywood made a movie with James Woods and Mercedes Rules. It's called Indictment. I mean, it's actually on the Hulu or the HBO Max, or you can probably find a bootleg version on YouTube and watch for free. Yeah, for that just be going on at different, there's a case down in Austin that was like the McMartin case. So for that just to be going on at different schools throughout the country, and in seeing like ritual, like finding evidence of that, like police finding it, social workers finding it, this moral, and then they said it was just the right-wing Christian conservatives overreacting, and it was satanic or moral panic. But there was a very good reason for that, and it was valid then, and it's valid now. But the other thing that I have a problem with, and the reason why I don't feel sorry for Morbid, is I don't think he's the victim. And I don't think that he should say that he stayed at that hotel and that he didn't know that the hotel was also where Jack or John Undergarden, where Richard Ramirez stayed. He didn't know about the connection to the Black Dahlia. I don't think he's a victim. And I don't think he's innocent. And one of the things is that when you dabble in things like that, you attract this negative energy and this demonic presence in your life. And so that really concerned me, that even if it's an art, like if it's like he's saying that this is my music and this is my art, and that I'm not like that, it's just a character I'm playing, then I would still warn him, because if you look at the movies like The Exorcist or The Omen, the originals, and if you look at how it's considered cursed and all the deaths and accidents and injuries that happened making those films because they were playing and toying with Satanism, that's kind of an unintended consequence. So even if he isn't that person, it's just a stage persona, he may also be unintentionally attracting a lot of negative energy. And for him to be acting out, harming a woman, even though it's an act or if it's a performance, it's still the same. And the next one's going to be about Amy Price. I may have to take a break because I'm a bit parched and I'm not used to talking, even though I used to talk for a living. Okay, so I'm logging off. That was my take on Morbid. I don't think he did it, but I think he's lying because I think he's got a bigger part in the docuseries, because that was the whole purpose, to discredit internet sleuthers and Satanic Panic. All right, that was my take. Good night, logging off.